Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I don't have a Twitter account. I'm pretty boring, so. I'm Bernarldo. That's how you pronounce my first name. I go by Bernie a lot because my first name is pretty hard to pronounce on the first try. And I focus on identity for the Azure Government Platform, and that's me. So what is Azure Active Directory? It's basically a access management cloud, or our identity access management for our cloud, essentially. We provide you capability to empower your users themselves, your customers, your partners, through different capabilities through the platform. It's a combination of directory services, and then what I mean by access management, stuff like identity providers that allow you to authenticate your users using a broad set of industry standard tokens and tokens and authentication types. We pride ourselves on standards-based integration. We don't like stovepipe monolithic solutions and systems. So everything that we're going to invest in on the platform is going to be based on open standards again. Open authorization, OpenID Connect, which is our authentication protocol that we built in on top of the OpenAuth standard. Okay, making sure the screen didn't go black again. SAML, WS Federation. We also support REST-based, which is really an approach more so than a protocol. REST-based services through our Graph API. And while we're talking about that, the Graph API essentially is for how many people run Active Directory on premises today, by a show of hands? Very few, okay. Or for those that do, you're familiar with having tools like Active Directory uses computers, or the Active Directory Administration Center, where you have a common place basically to go view and administer your users, computers, groups, organizational units. The structure in Azure AD is a pretty flat structure, so you need, and we don't have a UI equivalent to the AD users and computers that you have on premises, so we provide you with the Graph API to be a very robust and searchable interface to query your users and groups and whatnot. We also support, for anyone who's heard of FIDO, there's a very late incoming standard. It's an alliance, Fast Identity Online. So a lot of next generation authentication, forward-leaning things in light of all of the breaches and hacks we've seen. That we're starting to put more effort and investment into that alliances too as well, and make those into our products. Again, this is just a more further breakdown into the protocols that we support. Again, sign-in protocols like WS Federation, SAML, OpenAuth, OpenID Connect. Authentication protocols like Kerberos that you guys use on premise today. For some of you, certificate-based authentication. We support OAuth, token types, JSON web tokens, and SAML web tokens as well. One difference, since Brian was talking about some of the differences we have in our Azure Government Platform. One difference you'll see, and the one way you'll know if you're hitting a resource that's actually protected by Azure AD is you'll see the endpoint, login endpoint of login.microsoftonline.us compared to the suffix of .com in our public cloud. One of the biggest things that we've talked about and kind of advertised over the last year and a half is how identity is now like the core of your enterprise mobility for your users, or identity is the new control plane. Historically, your environments look like this, where Everything that you have, every service that you make available to your users, or let's say the lion's share of it, maybe 95% of it is hosted on premises, behind your firewalls, behind your networking gear. And obviously in recent years, you've seen more and more services being offered through the cloud, through SaaS services, our platform, Salesforce, Google, whatever have you. And so as we talk about the traditional things that you offer on premises, and now you have this broad set of options to consume in the cloud, how do you connect those things? And that's where we come in with Azure Active Directory, where essentially we can provide you the hybrid model that Brian was also talking about, where we can provide you access to, well, we can continue providing you access to your on-premises investments and applications that you're running there and that you may not be ready to or may never be ready to move to the cloud, as well as using that same identity for the users to access these services that are out here in the public cloud. So how do we get this going? We provide a quote-unquote simple connection. That line or simple connection represents some type of directory synchronization where we take your existing user identities on premises, we push those into the cloud. You guys maintain the source of authority, where all attributes of those users, office unit, display name, any password management is all continuing to be managed on premises. So we just take in a read-only copy of basically what you guys give to us in the cloud. I'm sorry? Yes, the question was, is that through Azure AD Connect? Yes, we've had, good question. We've had a few iterations of that tool, what we now call Azure AD Connect, to synchronize those identities in. It's been called, initially it was called the Directory Synchronization Tool, which is way too simple, so we decided to rebrand that to Azure AD Sync, and then that was too complicated, so we decided to put all those things together in Azure AD Connect, which really makes no sense from a marketing perspective, but it's okay. It's okay. It gets the job done. So you can see here, we start off with the simple connection on the left, and then we have Microsoft Azure Active Directory in the middle here, which is providing you that connection into the applications that you want to access off into the cloud. And in there, if you want to, it just depends on the type of model, and we'll talk about those on the next few slides in terms of how your users will authenticate, what capabilities they want to be able to use with their identities. We do offer like self-service password management. We can do single sign-on as well. So there's a lot of options that we can provide you in our identity platform. Last but not least, the little box with the sprockets off to with the last arrow pointing back to you is that we can also bridge authentication back to, or we can more simply stated, protect your applications that won't go into the cloud by our Azure AD application proxy. So some of you are familiar with maybe reverse proxies like F5 big IP appliances, or our old ISA server or Microsoft Threat Management Gateway, where you basically allow your users to access your on-premises applications by providing something out in the DMZ that can, kind of demarcate your internal from your external footprint. Well, we can do that for you as well. So we can do it with whatever identities that you guys have in Azure AD. So I want to talk about the identity models. This is the context of tonight is all about how to get started. So we're going to talk about the most relevant things for you guys to know to get started with identity. So we have obviously on-premises identity. We talked about that a little bit, where we have customers that have on-premises investments today. They're running in Azure Directory Enterprise today, whether that's 500 users or 600,000 users. So that's one model that has been used for decades now. And then when we first rolled out the cloud, we pretty much made everyone use or implement their own or a separate user account or identity for to access those resources, right? Those Azure subscriptions that Brian was talking about, having a different account to manage those. And that kind of speaks back to, sorry, I'm going back a slide, to and this kind of mimics or matches the flow of this diagram here, where we're talking about having mostly on-premises stuff on the left and then cloud stuff on the right. And that's what your cloud ID represents. Don't get me wrong, this is a good option or solution for people who don't have on-premises investments. It's just that a lot of our customers do. And then in the middle, or the sweet spot, if you will, is what we call hybrid identity. So some customers want to run things in a hybrid manner. Well, we provide you hybrid identity to go along with that. What does that mean? I just kind of talked about that or illustrated that through the last slide, but essentially it means taking your on-premises AD users and syncing them to the cloud, so allow you to be able to access those resources that you have provisioned in the cloud. I say provision, but you could also obviously use these same identities to access software as a service applications like Office 365 that you don't provision. They're just provided to you and ran at scale by us. On the bottom here, there are some scenarios that talks about what you want to do and what model best suits you. And all three down at the bottom, they're all acronyms, but they're all variants of the hybrid identity model. Password sync, SSO for any customer who manages or still uses passwords to log in to their desktops today. And then, which is usually the kind of the starter scenario. We'll go more into it in the next couple slides. And then off to your right, you can see that there's more check boxes or check marks in the list as you go to the right. And to implementing a federation server or using our Active Directory federation services. Off to the right, when you want to implement stuff like multi-factor authentication and use smart cards or common access cards for DoD people and PIV cards for people in federal agencies. So I want to talk about starter scenarios, as I talked about. We'll go more into these. Hybrid identity is what we're going to talk about first. Again, password sync. I'm just kind of double-clicking on this topic. What it looks like. How does it work? So you use Azure AD Connect, like the gentleman asked in the back, to be your glue, if you will, right? This is a server that you actually install on your premises. You manage it. It's totally under your control, and that gives you the flexibility to determine what information you want to send to the cloud in terms of users, groups, contacts, and whatnot. Once your Azure AD Connect box is set up and you're pushing identities into the cloud, again, password sync is the most kind of simple thing to implement for agencies, customers, business units that are using passwords still. What essentially happens is that user wants to sign in, they want to access an Azure SQL database or OneDrive or their Outlook and just host it in Exchange Online. They implement, or they sign in to their device, they enter their username and password. And through that password being synchronized up to Azure AD, we essentially recognize the same password and which grants you SSO, seamless sign-on, into these applications that you're trying to access into the cloud. So we're talking about passwords, we're talking about hashes. I know we're talking, this is a very sensitive topic. And so we want to talk a little bit about what we do to secure those passwords. We will take your hashes on premises, and when we sync them, we will throw another hash on top of the hashes that we just synced from you, to make sure that even if you were to get the hash, you would not be able to, you would have to descramble it twice, basically, in order to make it usable for you guys. And the hash basically is a mathematical function that is supposed to make it irreversible to anyone that's trying to crack it. We do protect it with some of the latest cryptographic algorithms, the latest being SHA-256, and all of our stuff is protected by SSL. So you want to use this when you already have an on-premises directory. You know you want to maybe eventually move into federated identity, and you know the health of your AD is good. Hybrid identity through federation, kind of following that chart we showed earlier. There's a lot more happening here, but at the center of it, you're still synchronizing accounts. And basically, whenever you access these services in the cloud, Azure SQL DB, again, OneDrive, Outlook, basically, instead of the authentication being managed totally and handled by us in the cloud, we actually will defer the authentication to you to happen on premises. So that way, the authentication happens within your boundaries, and you can manage and have more control over what happens. It's kind of new. We give you the optional ability to implement a password sync backup, just in case if you have a domain controller and you can't access any of your domain controllers on an enterprise network, you're pretty much done. No one can get any work done. So the same is true for ADFS. If your ADFS infrastructure, all of it just goes down, they won't be able to sign in. So we provide you with a way of a backup through password sync to get in if something were to happen to your ADFS infrastructure. Let's get through that one.
Another question. Do you recommend that backup password hash sync, or would it be more reasonable to have a read-only domain controller in Azure? I was deploying identity as a government foundation. We did that. We migrated their ADFS to Azure, and then also had everything express identity down. We had a domain controller sync up.
I think it's easier to, some of it is a opinion, or you can say a risk-based or cost-based discussion. I think it's certainly easier to run the password sync as the backup option. Hopefully you never have to use it. A lot of that depends on how robust and redundant your ADFS infrastructure is. But putting a read-only domain controller in the cloud puts more tax on you guys to run it. You still have to patch it. You have to pay more for the compute as it runs in Azure IS. So I would recommend personally the backward password sync. That makes sense. Okay. I'm pretty much wrapping up here. I just want to talk a little bit about hybrid identity preparation. Like we're talking about syncing and pushing the information to the cloud. What do you need to do? You just need to determine how you want to sign in. Whether that's going to be your UVN or your alternate ID. I know for some agencies and customers, your UPN is not something that's actually routable. It may be something like a company at local or a company at company.local. So you may need to use some other type of name there. And we also have tools basically that allow you to kind of perform hygiene in your directory to make sure that you can successfully sync identities into the cloud. The last one is pretty much cloud identity. We talked about that one as well. Basically, it's pretty much, couldn't make it any easier. All we do there is we provide you with a way to have identities into the cloud. And these are some resources for you guys to get started. The most important one I want to point out is just the Azure, the aka.ms Azure Gov trial. So if you guys want to get started like tomorrow and spin up some resources, I would encourage you to go sign up there to get validated. Don't have time for any questions. I have to pass this off to Guy Cavallo in the SBA. Thank you.